May 30th, 1862. After a month of struggling through the mud and dust of northeastern Mississippi, the vital rail junction of Corinth falls to the combined Union armies of Major General Henry W. Halleck. The capture of Corinth caps off almost 3 straight months of Union victories in the Western Theater. Once the junction is securely in Union hands, many on both sides wonder where this colossal force will go next. With this massive force, Halleck can easily take the important Confederate bastion on the Mississippi, Vicksburg, or finish off the demoralized and disease-ridden Confederate army at Tupelo. Yet, despite facing little resistance in the conquest of the vital rail junction, Halleck does the unthinkable and ends his conquest at the height of the campaigning season, grinding the federal momentum to a halt and allowing the distraught Southerners a chance to catch their breath. Instead of leading vast armies of men across the Western Theater, imagine Buell or Bragg taking command of champions that help them conquer the universe. In 40K Warhammer Tacticus, you can do just that, in today's video sponsor. You might ask, what is Warhammer 40K Tacticus? It is an exciting turn-based tactical strategy game set in the eternal conflict in the Warhammer 40K universe. The second you start playing, you get transported to the challenging, fast-paced battlefield all in the palms of your hands. As you conquer, you can assemble and lead a vast army of 70-plus legendary Warhammer 40K champions from 17 playable factions. Don't want to play by yourself? There's a passionate community of gamers and Warhammer fans that you can join, where you can fight with or against other players in many different game modes such as PvE campaigns, PvP events, guild raids, and much more. You can download the game for free today by clicking on the link down in the description or scanning my QR code here on the screen. Halleck disperses his massive force of 110,000 men to defend their new gains in the region. Being second in command, Major General Ulysses S. Grant is given command of 2 armies, his own 38,000-man Army of the Tennessee and the Army of the Mississippi to defend West Tennessee. Major General John Pope, the aggressive commander who captured New Madrid, is called east by Lincoln to form a new army to face a growing threat from Lee. In the wake of Pope's departure, Major General William S. Rosecrans is given command of the 25,000-man Army of the Mississippi and takes over the defense of Corinth. Finally, Major General Don Carlos Buell and his 30,000-man Army of the Ohio is sent overland to capture the vital rail junction of Chattanooga on the Cumberland River in southeastern Tennessee, while the remaining troops are transferred to Arkansas to shore up that front. As Halleck disperses his massive federal army at Corinth, the remnants of the combined Confederate army at Tupelo are on the verge of collapse. Despite saving his army from destruction at Corinth, General P.G.T. Beauregard, the overall commander of Confederate forces in the Western Theater, abandons his men without authorization and heads to the spots in southern Alabama. Beauregard, who already has a strained relationship with President Davis for abandoning Corinth, infuriates the president further with his last act of insubordination. Furious, Davis promptly fires the Creole and replaces him with General Braxton Bragg as the new theater commander on June 20th. With Beauregard out of the picture, Bragg is left in command of 65,000 tired, sick, and demoralized men to contend with the 3 federal armies under Buell, Grant, and Rosecrans. Born on March 22, 1817, in Warrenton, North Carolina, General Braxton Bragg is a rising star in the Confederate Army after the death of General Albert Sidney Johnston at the Battle of Shiloh. With General Beauregard on the way out after his dismal career in the West, Davis needs a new man to step up and lead the Confederate forces to victory in the Western Theater. As a West Point graduate with experience fighting both the Seminoles and Mexicans, Bragg is the ideal man for the job. Yet, despite being the best man, Bragg suffers from mental and physical side effects from his traumatic childhood that impairs his decision-making abilities. As a result, Bragg has an acute lack of empathy and tends to blame others. These impairments will profoundly affect how Bragg commands his men as a senior ranking officer in the Western Theater. Bragg knows he does not have enough men to succeed against the Federal armies if they join forces to face him, the exact situation that happened against Johnston at the disastrous Battle of Shiloh 2 months prior. Knowing this, Bragg's course of action is to defeat the Federal armies in detail. His hardest task is not fighting the battle itself, but deciding where to attack. As Buell's army of the Ohio slowly marches towards Chattanooga, Grant and Rosecrans remain passive around Corinth, creating a golden opportunity for Bragg to take the offensive against the separating Federal armies. Bragg's first option is to march north against the Federal garrison at Corinth and retake the railroad junction. With Buell marching his army out of the picture, this certainly is a possibility. His second option is to chase after Buell as he slowly advances toward Chattanooga. However, this route will leave Grant free to move unimpeded towards Vicksburg, the last formidable Confederate stronghold on the Mississippi. The third option is for Bragg to swing his army around Buell and block his eastward advance using interior railroads. This will allow Bragg to link up with forces in eastern Tennessee, leveling the odds against Buell. If Bragg goes with his third option and defeats Buell, he may open up a direct route to Middle Tennessee and maybe even Kentucky. Yet, as Bragg considers each of his options, he lacks the self-confidence to choose a strategy to pursue. As Bragg ponders his next campaign, he slowly comes to favor a move towards Chattanooga and a strike north. There are a few factors that push Bragg into moving east. The first is Buell's slow progress towards Chattanooga due to the regional drought, which has reduced his advance to a crawl. The second factor is speed. Traveling by rail via Mobile and Atlanta will allow him to win the race to Chattanooga, thus enabling Bragg to block Buell from reaching the town. The third factor is the political and military benefits of striking into Kentucky, a fellow slave state. Many Kentuckians believe that their state has unwillingly joined the North and are eager for a pro-Confederate government to take over. Bragg has been told by prominent Kentuckians that thousands will join his ranks if he marches north into the bluegrass states, a luring proposition to build up his small army. The fourth and final factor that leads Bragg to eventually take his army into Kentucky is Major General Edmund Kirby Smith, a native Floridian in command of a small Confederate army in East Tennessee. East Tennessee is the poorest and most rugged part of the state. Even worse, the region is pro-Union, forcing Smith to contend with a highly disloyal population that has been constantly sending the North new recruits. Dissatisfied with his assignment in the rebellious backcountry, Smith sees glory to be gained by invading Kentucky. With news of the approach of Buell's army from the west, Smith sees this as an opportunity to receive some reinforcements from Bragg for his prospective campaign. Smith promises Bragg if he comes to his aid, he will assist him in his invasion into Middle Tennessee and possibly even Kentucky. With these words whispering in his ears, Bragg's course of action is all but decided. To prepare his army to move east, Bragg reorganizes a 33,000-man army of Mississippi into two roughly equal wings. Major General William J. Hardee is given command of the left wing, while Major General Leonidas Polk takes command of the right wing. In Bragg's eyes, Hardee has shown great leadership at the Battle of Shiloh and deserves his position. Yet, unlike Hardee, the less capable Polk is a political appointee due to being a favorite friend of President Davis. Due to this arrangement, Bragg will find it hard to work with this political general who he deems incompetent. On June 26, Bragg sends McCown's division of 3,000 men east to reinforce Smith. Then he sends Confederate raiders under Colonel Forrest to impede Buell's advance, which in conjunction with the drought proves to be a huge success. To protect the vital stronghold of Vicksburg on the Mississippi River, Bragg orders Major General Earl Van Dorn with 16,000 men to defend the fortress city. While in Tupelo, he leaves Major General Sterling Price in command of another 16,000 men, with instructions to prevent either Grant or Rosecrans from assisting Buell as he moves towards Chattanooga. As Bragg's army in Mississippi prepares for its move towards Chattanooga, other Confederate forces are on the move as well. On July 4th, with encouragement from General Smith, Colonel John Hunt Morgan, in command of 900 men, rides north into the Bluegrass State. For the next 3 weeks, Morgan sweeps through Kentucky, capturing 12,000 Federals, acquiring hundreds of horses, destroying massive quantities of supplies, and distracting thousands of Federal troops from being sent to the front. When Morgan returns from a successful raid in Kentucky, he is hailed as Jeb Stuart of the West. Not only is Morgan's raid extremely successful, but it also inspires a revolt against the federal-controlled state government in Frankfort. Morgan reports to Smith that, if the whole country can be secured, 25 to 30,000 men will join you at once. With all these dazzling reports coming from the Bluegrass State, Kirby Smith's mind wanders north. On July 23rd, once all is prepared, Bragg begins his 776-mile journey to Chattanooga via Mobile and Atlanta. This circuitous route is a memorable time for the soldiers in Bragg's army, as it received cheers from local citizens while passing from town to town. For the next 2 weeks, the train route incredibly moves 30,000 infantry from Montgomery, Alabama to Chattanooga, Tennessee, successfully beating Buell to the railroad junction, a feat many will remember for the rest of their lives. On July 31st, Bragg meets with Smith in Chattanooga, completing his momentous journey from Tupelo. Once the pleasantries are over, the two work late into the night planning their campaign into Middle Tennessee. The plan calls for the combined forces of Bragg and Smith to march north, and seize the Cumberland Gap from Union Brigadier General George W. Morgan's division. Once the gap is cleared, the entire force will sweep into Middle Tennessee and destroy Buell's Army of the Ohio in northern Alabama. Once Buell is defeated, the Confederate forces will strike north into Kentucky. In the likely chance that Grant sends reinforcements to Buell, Price and Van Dorn are ordered to strike the Federals stationed in northern Mississippi. However, their plan is fraught with risk. Movements on a large scale such as this by armies separated by hundreds of miles require precise cooperation and perfect timing, which rarely happens. Anything that deviates from the plan can derail the entire campaign. Due to the confusing system of departments set up in the Confederacy, Bragg and Smith are considered equals, even though Bragg is the senior ranking officer. Neither officer has the authority to issue orders to the other if they are separated. Once they join forces, Smith will come under Bragg's command. Unsure about how well this relationship will work, Bragg confides with his friend, President Davis, about the situation. In the correspondence, Davis gives Bragg a false sense of friendly cooperation between him and Smith, further exacerbating his uncertainty about his role in the upcoming campaign. Just as Smith returns to his headquarters in Knoxville, he goes against the agreement with Bragg and plans his own invasion of Kentucky instead, thinking a lone invasion of the Bluegrass State would bring him more glory. To further his plans, Smith requests and receives more men, especially from Bragg's veterans, for a fake operation against the Cumberland Gap. On August 9th, once the veteran brigades of Smith and Cleburne arrive, Smith writes to Bragg telling him that he is breaking their agreement and is bypassing the gap, heading straight for the heart of Kentucky instead, regardless of what Buell does. Lacking the authority to countermand Smith and unable to confront Buell alone, Bragg can do little besides go along with Smith's new plan of invading Kentucky. After convincing himself of the merits, Bragg writes passively to Smith telling him he will support his move. Due to his indecisiveness, Bragg has let a junior officer strong-arm him into invading Kentucky against his better judgment, a precedent that might spell a disaster for the Confederates in the upcoming campaign. With Bragg's meek approval of the plan, Smith writes to President Davis to get authorization for the invasion of Kentucky, stating, "Politically, Now is the time to strike at Kentucky. Delay loses a golden opportunity, and fall finds her people powerless in a large army between us and the waters of the Ohio. While Smith is scheming behind Bragg's back, the latter orders Price and Van Dorn to work in unison with his force by threatening West Tennessee. However, Bragg allows both generals to work independently of each other until they join forces, a relationship that proves uncooperative, the same dilemma he himself is in. By August 11th, Smith is ready to launch his campaign, but Bragg's tired veterans are not. Bragg asks Smith to wait a few more weeks, but to no avail. Smith is moving north with or without Bragg. On the night of August 13th, with 21,000 men divided into 4 divisions, Smith's Army of Kentucky leaves its base at Knoxville to begin his long-anticipated invasion of Kentucky. The morale among his men rises as they march north. As they march, they start singing hymns, viewing themselves as missionaries to liberate Kentucky for God and the Confederacy. While Bragg is continuing to prepare his men for the invasion of Kentucky, Smith is marching straight for Lexington, the heart of the bluegrass state. Because General Morgan is entrenched in the Cumberland Gap, Smith leads only a holding force while he continues his advance north. On August 29th, as the energized Confederates march forward, they unexpectedly find half of the Union Army of Kentucky under Major General William Nelson blocking their path at Richmond. The next day, Cleburne's veterans attack and swiftly rout the Green Union defenders from the field, wounding General Nelson in the process. As the Federals flee, they discover their path blocked by Churchill's division moving upon their rear. Unable to escape, the Federal soldiers surrender. When it is all over, the Confederates capture over 4,000 Federals, making the Battle of Richmond one of the most lopsided Confederate victories at this point in the war. With the destruction of Nelson's force at Richmond, the road to Lexington is clear. On September 2nd, butternut soldiers march through the town and are greeted by cheers from the populace. A Tennessean in Preston Smith's brigade recalled that the balconies, housetops, and windows, in fact every place available for view, was filled with people cheering and waving handkerchiefs. Unable to stop Smith from reaching Lexington, the remaining Federal forces retreat across the Ohio River to Cincinnati, leaving only Louisville as the sole Union bastion in Kentucky. With the possibility of the Confederates reaching the Ohio River, thousands of volunteers from across the North rallied to defend their states. With the capture of Lexington in the majority of the state, Smith feels like a warrior from the Old Testament declaring, "God's hand has directed me in this movement." But as Smith feels the glory of conquering Kentucky, the realization of the situation dawns upon him. He has no concrete plan on what to do next after capturing Lexington and is unsure of his next move. He realizes that he is isolated deep in Union territory without any immediate assistance. Reports arrive about Federal forces concentrated in Louisville and Cincinnati, along with rumors that Grant's Shiloh veterans are among them. As his anxiety takes over, Smith goes on the defensive and desperately writes to Bragg to save him in his time of need, just as he did before in East Tennessee. Meanwhile, in Stevenson, Alabama, after receiving news that Bragg's army has beaten him to Chattanooga, Buell decides to end his half-hearted attempt of taking the railroad junction. On August 20th, Buell orders his army back to Nashville to protect the supply base. With reports of Bragg's army on the verge of moving from Chattanooga, Buell can only speculate on his ultimate destination. To Buell, Bragg has only 2 options, either heading west towards Nashville to retake the state capital from the Federals, or march north and link up with Smith in Lexington. Yet, until Bragg reveals his hand, Buell will be forced to wait in Nashville. On August 28th, with the Army of Mississippi finally in an operational state, Bragg orders his army to move out. With the Cumberland Gap still under Union control, Bragg angles his march north towards Glasgow, Kentucky, narrowly avoiding Buell, who's trying to lay a trap in the gaps near McMinnville, Tennessee. Upon learning of Bragg's advance, Buell orders his men to march after the Confederate army, hoping to catch them while they are strung out on the roads leading north. With Buell rapidly marching upon his rear, Bragg pushes his men hard, reaching Glasgow on September 7th. Once in Glasgow, Bragg wants to march straight north to link up with Smith, but his path is blocked. Standing between Bragg and Smith is a small garrison of 1,800 men under Colonel John T. Wilder at Munfordville, guarding the vital Louisville and Nashville Railroad bridge across the Green River. On September 14th, after receiving a tip from some of Smith's cavalry, Brigadier General James Chalmers marches north without orders from Bragg and attacks the fort, being easily repulsed. That night, after receiving the news of the fight, Bragg reacts with unrelenting anger. Not only did Chalmers get repulsed after an unauthorized attack, but now Buell is just to the west in Bowling Green. It is now a race against time to see which army reaches Smith first, Buell or Bragg. Even though Buell could have marched around Munfordville, the general refuses to leave the federal garrison in his rear. Instead, he pushes his entire army to deal with this pesky Union force. Once he reaches Munfordville, the Confederate army surrounds Wilder's garrison. Wilder, who is new to command, is unsure how to respond to Bragg's army. Luckily, an unsuspecting friend comes to his assistance. Under a flag of truce, Major General Simon B. Buckner shows his federal friend the Confederate forces and convinces him to surrender, which he does on September 17th. With the surrender of Munfordville, Bragg captures 4,000 men, a vast quantity of war materials, and supplies his men desperately need. With the annoying garrison out of the way, Bragg now has some time to decide how to approach this new phase of the campaign, as he stands between Buell and Louisville. As Buell's army is filing into Bowling Green on September 14th, they learn that Bragg has not dallied at Glasgow, but moved north to besiege the Munfordville garrison. With Bragg's small army in his sights and preoccupied with their siege, the Confederates are vulnerable to being attacked in the rear. Yet, Buell waits 2 days before moving forward to give battle. As the Federals advance, they come upon Wilder's paroled men, who report the Confederates are ready to receive them. With this news, Buell halts his advance and refuses to fight until he receives reinforcements, ordering Thomas, who is currently in Nashville, to link up with his forces in southern Kentucky. With the capture of Munfordville, Bragg has the opportunity to force Buell to battle or march upon Louisville. At Munfordville, the Army of Mississippi holds the Louisville Pike, which means that Buell has to either contend with the Confederates or take a circuitous route to reach Kentucky's prominent city. Meanwhile, chaos reigns supreme in Louisville. With only a few brigades of raw troops to defend the key city, the Federals expect Bragg's ragged veterans to easily take the town. Considering his situation, Bragg deduces that Buell would take the circuitous route to reach Louisville. With this in mind, he concludes that he has time to link up with Smith and then march on the river town before Buell arrives. In the end, however, Bragg lingers in Munfordville for 3 days, losing his best chance to take the city. On September 20th, the disappointing Confederates march north to Bardstown, giving Buell, who has not moved yet, a clear path north, letting the civilians of the important town breathe a sigh of relief. In the Army of the Ohio, the soldiers are furious at Buell's indecisiveness. To them, the general has not only let Bragg and Smith invade their homes, but now he refuses to fight them. Coupled with the defeat at Munfordville, they're disgusted with their commander. Buell, on the contrary, has no desire to fight until reinforcements join him, as he worries that the Confederates outnumber him. With this on his mind, Buell pushes his tired and ragged soldiers to the safety of Louisville, reaching the town on September 25th. Once the exhausted men of Buell's army arrive, they disperse to find what food they can eat. While the soldiers revel in their precious time off, Buell begins a heated political battle to keep his position as the commander of the Army of the Ohio, forcing everybody, from private to general, to take a side. Amid the chaos engulfing Louisville, an unexpected disaster shakes the entire federal high command in Kentucky. As the Confederates move north, Indiana-born Brigadier General Jefferson C. Davis is sent to work with Kentuckian General Nelson, who is a Buell supporter, to organize the defense of Louisville. The two start to argue and trash each other's state in public. On the 25th, emotions come to a head. Tired of Davis's antics, Nelson issues a warrant for Davis's arrest. Taken aback by the warrant, Davis travels to Louisville to confront Nelson in person and finds him in the gatehouse on September 29th. The two generals get into a heated argument until Davis loses his temper and shoots Nelson in the chest, who dies within the hour. As word spreads of Nelson's death, the army almost unilaterally praises Davis for the assassination. Despite the murder, Davis is never convicted for the killing due to the crisis facing Kentucky. However, Buell's biggest threat to his position comes from Washington, D.C. Due to his bad performance and attitude in the past few weeks, Lincoln is on the verge of removing him. With the midterms coming up, the radical Republicans in Lincoln's administration want to remove all Democrat generals in command, such as McClellan and Buell, who have shown a lack of motivation in persecuting the South, and replace them with more energetic Republican generals. Therefore, on September 29th, Buell receives the orders relieving him as a commander of the Army of the Ohio on the same day as Nelson's assassination. In his place, Halleck chooses Major General George H. Thomas to become the new commander. Yet, in the height of the crisis facing Kentucky, Thomas is unwilling to accept the promotion, stating, "General Buell's preparations have been completed to move against the enemy, and I therefore respectfully ask he may be retained in the command." Unable to convince Thomas to take over, Halleck agrees and suspends the orders relieving Buell until the crisis is averted. Due to the mayhem that has reigned on September 29th, Buell will keep his command until the crisis afflicting Kentucky is over. While everything else is going on in Louisville, the last of Buell's reinforcements finally arrive in the city. But with Nelson's death, Buell is forced to reorganize his army. Due to almost being replaced, Buell places Thomas as second in command of the army and works closely with him the coming days. The commanding general parcels out his 25 brigades among 3 corps. For the 13,000-man 1st Corps, Buell selects Major General Alexander McCook. Alexander is a member of the Fighting McCooks and is a competent officer who can be counted upon, even though he preferred Thomas as the army commander. Major General Thomas Crittenden is chosen for the 20,000-man 2nd Corps, another competent officer who showed talent at Shiloh. Even though McCook and Crittenden are easy choices, the commander of the 3rd Corps is not. Buell intended for Nelson to be the 3rd Corps commander. However, since he recently died, there are not many decent options left. Buell ultimately taps Major General Charles Gilbert to lead the 22,000-man 3rd Corps. With his army ready for battle, Buell plans his advance against Bragg and Smith. On October 1st, Buell plans for 2 divisions under Brigadier General Joshua W. Sill to demonstrate against Frankfort, where Smith's army is reported to be. While Sill's demonstration is being executed, the 1st, 2nd, and 3rd Corps will march on separate roads toward Bragg's reported location at Bardstown. With Smith and Bragg distracted with Sill further north, the Confederates will not expect a federal advance from the west, a simple plan that Buell hopes will crush the rebel invaders. While Buell reorganizes his army, the Confederates rest in Bardstown. Despite the success his army has achieved, Bragg could not help but feel dispirited. Bragg hoped that once he arrived in Kentucky, the Kentuckians would swell his ranks to offset the Federals' numerical advantage. Only a few actually joined his ranks, and those who did deserted soon after. Even if Smith links up with his army, Bragg will still not have enough men to face a reinforced Federal army. With no recruits forthcoming and Smith being reluctant to join him, Bragg is now considering abandoning the campaign altogether and returning to Tennessee. Just as Bragg is on the verge of leaving, Richard Hawes, the provisional governor of Kentucky, arrives from Richmond. Hawes' arrival gives Bragg an idea. If he can formally install him in Frankfort, the governor can issue a conscription bill for the state to force reluctant Kentuckians to join him. With his plans set on September 28th, Bragg and Hawes rides with an escort first to Smith in Lexington and then to the capital at Frankfort, leaving Polk in command of the army. On his way to Smith, Bragg passes through the small town of Perryville, which is reported to have a good supply of water during the extreme drought facing the region. As Bragg rides towards Smith, The general orders Polk to move the army north close to the Smith in Lexington so the two armies can link up. On October 1st, Bragg and Smith meet once again, the first time since their last meeting in Chattanooga back in August. Despite the momentary fall after Chattanooga, the two generals are happy to see each other once again. Now that the two generals are together, Bragg takes over the command of both armies. With Smith finally under his thumb and Hall's in Frankfort to assert Confederate control of Kentucky, it seems like nothing can stop Bragg from retaking the initiative. Yet, as both the Union and Confederate armies gear up to make their moves in northern Kentucky, reports start filtering back about Major General Earl Van Dorn marching north into Tennessee, seemingly bypassing the vital rail junction of Corinth, Mississippi. Thanks again to Warhammer 40k Tacticus for sponsoring today's video. Don't forget to download the game today by either using my link down in the description or the QR code here on the screen.